Awesome. Welcome back, everyone, to Jay's Oblivion. I'm again joined with Dragon
Hello.
and Worm,
Annyeong.
and we are continuing the top 20 action adventure game titled countdown, starting with our fifth to first. Well, guys, fifth for me, and I know it's not going to be on any of you guys' lists ever. It's Hunted the Demon's Forge. I absolutely love this game. When it first came out, I was all about it. I mean, it had, couch co-op. It was very much Gears of War, but with like swords and magic. Both characters to play as are fairly likable. The skill trees are diverse enough for each one that you really feel you have to utilize both to defeat the next big threat or the next boss fight that you're doing, because each one has like a weakness to certain things and you have to really focus on that and work as a team, and I really like that, and I definitely put it in that action adventure category really well. I don't think there's any really, anything that would say it's not.
Sure. I was actually really excited pre-release for Hunted the Demon's Forge. I thought it was a really cool concept. Even just like beyond Gears of War with like spells and moves and stuff. But in the end, I was let down by it just because it felt like bare bones budget. It felt like it should be a title that came out at like $39 instead of the full $60. But I mean, I did have fun with it, but it just wasn't as developed as was needed to be in my top 5.
Or even your top 20.
Or even my top 20.
It's really funny that you mentioned like boobs and magic and stuff, because the female elf chick, I can't remember her name, but her outfit is very revealing, but beyond that, they don't emphasize it at all. There's never like a camera pan like over her chest
That's
or
true.
anything. That's never like in your face. She's never like, oh, my breasts are too big to do anything,
Right, yeah.
It really is just like, this is her character design. Play Gears of War. Like, they didn't
Right.
care about any sexuality in that.
Yeah. The one thing I did like is that the characters, not even just like their character powers, in general they played separately, because the male was melee focused and the female was more ranged focused.
Yeah.
And so that incentivized you not just to go through it, like you could experience it a different way by second playthrough playing as the alternate character or whatever. So.
Did you ever play Dragon?
I did. I picked it up when it first came out,
Okay.
and I was looking for something co-op to play with Merchant. But ultimately, I didn't like it. We didn't get very far into it. Neither one of us really cared for it. It was like a little too gritty, a little too, I don't know. It just wasn't our flavor exactly. And for me personally, I don't know exactly why. It's been a while at this point, but it didn't hold my interest. That's what I recall distinctly, was being like, oh, I'm kind of excited for this, and then started playing it and quickly just was like, no, not digging this.
That's fair.
Yeah. The protagonist female had tattoos. That,
Oh, that's right, yeah.
that's a thing.
Actually, if I remember right, I think they grew with the...
Yeah,
as you
yeah, it was
added
like
the-
something to do with her elven
Yeah.
magic or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's major
Yeah.
killer for me.
Yeah.
You're 5.
My 5. So my 5 came up on somebody else's list earlier, but here it is: Red Dead Redemption.
Woo!
Part 2 of the soon-to-be Red Dead trilogy. Yes, there was a previous game to Red Dead Redemption. Nobody ever remembers. I know you guys know. And for the sake of the audience, Red Dead Redemption 2.
What's Red Dead Revolver?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like an arcadey level-based like third-person shooter. I mean, it's honestly a very different game. It's a quality game.
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
different game. Yeah.
I mean, it's still like a Rockstar game.
It was really like a throwback to Outlaws. I don't know if you guys ever played Outlaws,
Mhm.
but it was like that kind of gameplay, which I thought was fun.
Yeah, actually, around the time of Red Dead Revolver, there was a different cowboy game called Gun
Yeah,
that was
Gun.
much more Red Dead Redemption than Red Dead Revolver is.
Yeah, I didn't like Gun though. I don't know why.
Yeah.
They didn't pull it off as well for me. But yeah, so Red Dead Redemption, getting back, obviously, beautiful cinematic story-like experience. I mean, both in the sense that like I felt the character, I felt the side quests, I felt the environment. I loved wandering around. It was one of those games where I wanted to 100% it beyond just the story, you know. And really, the only letdown in the whole game was being what's his face, Jack at the end instead of John.
You didn't like that?
No, I hated that.
I
Finishing
finishing that
that
post gameplay.
It
I
was-
thought Jack's character was pretty cool.
Really, see, I just didn't like Jack. That's what it comes down to.
I
The-
prefer
the-
John Marston. for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. The concept was cool, and definitely, you know, spoiler alert, making the sacrifice as John Marston
Mhm.
was heavy, especially by the time you get to the end and you've experienced the character, and it's like, yeah, you're like, this is my boy, John Marston.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, well, he's gone now, and I have to play as his son.
Yeah.
Get revenge, but
And that was the thing, is that it was like integrated into the gameplay sequence so well, and you like go out there and you can try and go and do like Deadeye mode and everything.
Yeah.
It was really well integrated. I agree, I did not like Jack as much. But on one playthrough, I specifically went through doing none of the side quests,
so that you
and
can play it as
so I could
much
play
as possible as Jack.
as much as possible as Jack. And the stranger side quests, there's actually different dialogue that goes along with them when you're playing as Jack.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And he's not the absolute worst person, you know, still not John level.
Right, yeah.
So Red Dead Redemption's higher on my list than yours. I really, really value it. I'll talk a little bit more on it when it comes up on my list, just so I have something to say.
Yeah,
But,
that's fine.
What's your 5, Warren?
my number 5 is a title I played on the GameCube called Geist. If you've never played it, it's a game that's like supernatural sci-fi status. Basically, you were scientifically made into a ghost, and you have to proceed through using the ability to possess both objects and people to accomplish your objective. And people can't be possessed unless they are scared, so there's the puzzle mechanic of, well, I gotta possess this boiler pipe and make it explode to startle the person and put him in a vulnerable state so I can possess him, so that he can use his key card to open this door, and blah blah blah, so on and so forth. And
Sounds like my kind of game.
yeah, it was totally awesome. It was such a unique concept. It winds up being more of a point and shooty game towards the end, because you're possessing like security guards to like fight your way out and blah blah blah. And there's actually like a multiplayer mode to go alongside it, you know, like GoldenEye or whatnot. That was pretty neat because they integrated like the ghost gameplay into the multiplayer shooter gameplay. It was actually really awesome. I highly recommend playing it if you can deal with going back to like
Yeah.
GameCube control scheme and graphics and everything.
Alright, number 4. My number 4 personally is Lord of the Rings War in the North. Love that game. Again, this is another fantastic game to sit there and co-op through the story with, of course, you have your human, elf, dwarf characters. Each one plays significantly different. You know, the elf being like the mage and the healer,
Right.
dwarf being more of a powerhouse with even a crossbow, and you could get like the explosive shots as you leveled them up, and it had great replayability going in and starting a new game plus. Like with the first time I beat the game, my characters were like level 34, 35, and I'd go to like the blacksmith, and he'd be like, "Oh, here's like this really cool looking armor, and it has like way better stats." But like level 40 is what you got to be to buy it or have it on you, you know. And I was like, "Well, I want to get that." And then every time I'd go back and play it again, you just get higher and higher level, and then get the better gear. And I love that. I love putting new gear on my characters and everything. Did you guys play it at all? Or?
I mean, I did. I actually wasn't a fan of like the gear treadmill aspect of it. It's particularly bad in that game, and the thing is that for some people that really like ticks their box. Like you, there's always that sense of progression.
Mhm.
You'll find that in other titles like Diablo and whatnot. But for me, it's just like artificial lengthening. You know, I want to be able to have fun like at endgame as well, and not feel like it's a chore to get there. That's like kind of my big gripe with Injustice 2 right now, is that there's gear that I'm hunting for specifically,
Right.
and I don't feel like I'm really like playing or enjoying the game because I've got my eyes on that gear, and that just comes from me being, I guess, really objective focused or whatnot. So
Even beyond the wanting to grab all the gear, you still had a awesome Lord of the Rings story. The idea was their fellowship was going in opposite direction, or going a different way to destroy the ring. But they didn't actually have the ring, but they were tricking the Eye of Sauron. They were like, "Oh, we got it." And
Right, just to misdirect.
Right, yeah. So, and it played right along with that. You had the giant eagles you got to summon, which was really cool to do. The big, like, boss fights were a lot of fun, and it even went off into different directions of what you could do in the game. Like, there's one part near the end, spoiler alert, where you go and talk to Smaug, and you're like, you make a deal with him. You either are going there to kill him for, like, the king, and he wants you to the Dragon Dawn, and you're either going to do that, or when you get to Smaug, instead of, like, just doing a battle, you can talk to him, and he'll be like, I will actually be on your side in the end fight, and come help you if you do this other side quest for me. And it's a very tedious and long side quest that you have to go on, but it's like, well, what is worse, battling Smaug
Fighting Smaug,
or
right.
the side quest, you know? So I really like that. Also, when you, midway through, or I guess throughout the entire game, you run into original Lord of the Rings characters, and they all have their own individual dialogue with you. Like, you go talk to Frodo at one point, and he's like thanking you for all your help and like what you're doing, and it sounded good. It wasn't just like they grabbed like some Joe Schmo off the streets and was like, "Hey, pretend like you're Frodo." Like, it sounded like you're talking to Frodo. You know,
Right.
it was good. I really liked that game. And again, couch co-op or online co-op. It was fun.
Right, and that's the thing, is that the game has value in the same way that so many others do, where there's no such thing as a game that's not fun with your friend.
Right.
And I think that among those games, Lord of the Rings is a higher quality. I don't like bash you for having on your list. It doesn't get there for me because it doesn't tick like my boxes in particular. But there is something to be said about that. You know, Borderlands, Diablo, whatever it is. They're your friends. You enjoy spending time with them. So
Mhm.
being able to have a conduit to do that is always a plus.
I just didn't have a chance to play it. I'm not a big fan of the Tolkien universe in general, so I don't go out and seek anything that says Lord of the Rings or Hobbit or anything like that.
I think half our audience just cringe.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I like to say
You just like the Tolkien universe?
I like to say blasphemous nerd things. But speaking of going with the flow, although this is probably, so this is the first time this game franchise has been mentioned on any of our lists, which kind of surprises me. And I know this isn't one of the most popular games in the franchise, but it's by far my favorite. Number 4 for me is Majora's Mask from The Legend of Zelda. Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. For 64, it was the direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, of course. But so for me, this was really one of those games again that kind of got me into games. It sounds silly to say because of course I've been playing games since the Atari, but they were just like idle things to do before about the time I started playing Majora's Mask, where that was one where I got addicted to. I was lost in it. You know, I felt the atmosphere. I felt these characters, and why that one specifically, I still couldn't say. I love the time travel aspect. I love, again, meeting all the different characters, kind of the open worldness, pseudo maybe open worldness that the game had. Definitely the darkness of the atmosphere of it, the fact that everything was like a little bit creepy, like, a little bit spooky than compared to Ocarina of Time.
Right.
I actually discovered Majora's Mask first, and I played through the first 3 days, and then a friend of mine was like, oh, well, this is the sequel to this other game. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll go back and play Ocarina of Time. So then I went back, played Ocarina, then I played Majora's. And overall, Ocarina of Time, great game, work of art, beautiful story, all that. But Majora's Mask really just hits this niche for me that, I don't know, it's
Yeah, I really love, I call it Majora's Mask, I guess.
Oh yeah, I forget that I say it funny. I'm sorry. I know it's called Majora's Mask.
I think our audience could pick up on that.
It actually is called Majora's Mask. I've always said it Mayora. I don't know why. I like soft J sound.
And it sounds
It
sophisticated.
sounds cool.
It
Like,
sounds
it's
cool,
like,
right? Yeah.
oh man, Majora's Mask, and if you talk to someone, they're like, Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, Mayora.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
like you, I discovered that one before Ocarina of Time. This was back in the day when like McDonald's had video game systems, specifically Nintendo systems, in their like play place areas. They had the N64s and later the GameCubes. And the thing that continues to strike me about Majora's Mask to this day is, the time travel is part of it. I know that I have like, time travel, but that only lends. The time travel is necessary to the other aspect of it that I like, which is that the world is constantly progressing. the world is constantly progressing. So many games are, oh, I urgently need this side quest done. I need this herb from the mountains, otherwise I'm going to die of poison. And then they wait patiently 40, 80 hours or however long it takes you to come back around and do that side quest for them. Majora's Mask is happening all the time, no matter what. Whether you've discovered that side quest or not, you could come in and find someone dead of poisoning and be like, oh, I wonder what happened to them, and then you have to revisit them in the past to try and set things right. You can start a side quest, and then people will be like, hey, what's the deal? It's been 2 days. The world is constantly happening of its own accord, and then you just kind of visit it. And that's something that's kind of sort of replicated in like the third Final Fantasy 13 game, but Majora's Mask did it so much earlier and I think better.
So Majora's Mask is on my list as well. It's a little bit higher, and I will touch up on my points when we come around to it.
Okay.
Cool.
Fair.
So I guess that puts it at my number 4, and it's a game called Omicron: The Nomad Soul. So this is the game that precedes the game that precedes Heavy Rain, from the same studio. And the major selling point, I guess, could be it's a video game that heavily features David Bowie for people who are into that, which
All right.
I am. So the whole concept, this is what I was mentioning earlier about you playing as yourself. When you boot up the game, a character from the world kind of greets you and he's like, hey, I know that you live on Earth, so like in your universe, but inside the computer there's this like different universe and we have a problem and we need you to solve it. And the reason why they come to you is because you, the player, have this special power to possess different bodies, and your soul is a nomad, right? And that leads to this pseudo permadeath situation where you possess somebody, you level up their stats, you go about their business, and they could live in one of the many sections of the city and be living their own life, and then you die, and then your soul is moved to a different body who may be living in the same section of the city, maybe living in a different section of the city, and you have to pick up from there, and you have to try and like level up them as you see fit. It's not perfect. It tries to do a lot of different genres. There's like segments of gameplay that are like puzzle, there's third-person shooters, there's like a fighting game segment. It does a lot, but again, it's that first attempt at that like interactive movie experience that was later touched up on in the game like Indigo Prophecy or Fahrenheit, depending on your territory, and then Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls. And then, like I said, the soundtrack is actually entirely by David Bowie. The David Bowie album at the time was called Hours, and so literally every single track on that was remixed, re-edited, and had the vocals changed to be a part of the Omicron universe. And then David Bowie is a character himself who like performs his songs and you can like go meet and interact with. And that's
really
really cool.
cool. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
So of course the fantastic soundtrack and everything like that. And like I said, the concept of you playing as yourself, like me being Worm, and then affecting the game world, that's really cool to me.
Nice. So, number three for me, and we've already talked a little bit about this, and I already know your opinions, but it's Batman: Arkham Knight.
Oh, gross.
Easily my favorite of the Arkham series.
I'll tell you so many reasons you're wrong.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you so many reasons why I'm right, and maybe it's because you have to include everything, even outside of Batman. Being able, like the DLC, being able to play as Harley and Nightwing and Red Hood, all those little extra things. They made their own kind of mini game in Arkham Knight to play as those characters, include all new movesets and the whole way they play out, and dialogue, story, everything was included for all that. And I can go back and replay those challenges, 100 times, and it's just really fun. Also, the entire story of Arkham Knight, up until the last, 2 chapters, I would say are fantastic. And it's the way it ends that I'm kind of like, meh. But still, excellent game. They took what was good in Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. Like, Arkham City, going off of Asylum is what Asylum was, but making it bigger and better. And then Arkham Knight, I feel, really expanded on that more. I mean, obviously, there's some problems with the game, I'm not going to lie. But if you're going to give me one of the Arkhams, I'm going to tell you that that's my favorite. And a lot of that is the fast travel, getting around in like the Batmobile, everything that happens with Poison Ivy, getting Catwoman out. Like, it was just all fun to do. I mean, the Batmobile almost becomes like its own character when you're fighting. You can, you have that combo where you throw a thug up into the air and the Batmobile's like, no, shoots him down. And I don't know, I like that kind of stuff. It was just cool to see. And like, there's the whole part where the Batmobile is used, you use the crane, like shoot up the top of the building, and then you're like driving up the side, 90-degree angle of like the building, and like it's tugging you along, and I'm like, that's like what Batman does. That's what and Batman's not my favorite DC character, like, but you don't have to like Batman to like the games. Is really what it comes down to.
So Batman's not my favorite DC character either, but his best game is City, and okay, so there's a number of reasons why. So the Asylum to City transition into like this pseudo open world type deal, or like I guess it's largely an open world. It was answering a complaint. Like people said, oh, backtracking is just such a tedious thing. So Rocksteady says, okay, we'll just glide over the rooftops, no big deal. A lot of the changes that were made going into Arkham Knight weren't addressing any problems. It was just a concept of like over designing the game, like, oh, we have to like change stuff, right? And the main thing that gets me is I call it like Ubisoft syndrome, where the map of like side quests and objectives is just so amazingly cluttered. Well, you have to like climb this tower for the map point, and you have to help this guy do that thing, and you have to collect all the little feathers and blah blah blah, and there's just an endless list of clutter that you don't actually care about aside from, I want 100% this game. Like, it's not like engaging content or anything like that. Whereas a lot of the stuff for Arkham City was more handcrafted. Like I mentioned, the incident where you find where your parents die, or like the introduction of the Mad Hatter or anything like that. It just felt like more love was put into it instead of like how many icons and quests can we jam onto one map. The other thing that really irks me is you were touching on the Batmobile being so integrated. It's overly integrated. The Batmobile is
I agree. It's overly integrated. I'm saying the parts that I was talking about were way cool with the Batmobile. Yes, the whole tank fights and against Arkham Knight, and it was that was retarded.
But that's the thing, is that I didn't feel as able to appreciate the cool moments because it's like, hey, this puzzle has to be solved with the Batmobile. And I'm like, oh, great, the Batmobile again. I've only been out of the Batmobile for the past 45 seconds and I'm back in it. And then the one thing that's like kind of just me being like contrarian or whatever, or I don't even know what to call it. I don't want to spoil the game because it's like recent enough that like some people who want to play it haven't played it. But the twist ending, everybody called months before release. Everybody says, this is what's going to happen. And then Rocksteady said, no, we promise that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And then literally that happened.
Okay.
Literally exactly that happened.
Yeah, I have a problem with that too. But Azrael, man, Azrael's so good. So much fun with that.
I thought that like his appearance in Arkham City that was alluding to the events of Arkham Knight was cooler. And I feel like the one downside of Arkham City is that they wrote a check that they like eventually couldn't cash because they said with the Azrael prophecies, like, hey, Batman, stuff's gonna go down, it's gonna be like awesome game, it's gonna be phenomenal, and then you get it and they're like, oh yeah, we had mentioned some of the stuff happening, well we better like touch on that so that we aren't like liars dropping threads, but really we don't care about it. Like they kind of overcommitted.
I mean, okay, there are multiple points here. One, with the Batmobile issue, what game really on this whole list do we not contend with that same issue where like, oh, here's this new thing that we added to the game from Volume 1 to Volume 2. Guess what? You're going to spend a ton of time using it. And even in the previous Batman games, you use Arkham City as an example, you get radio-controlled batarangs. Well, guess what? A ton of puzzles require radio-controlled batarangs the moment you acquire that item in the game. the Zelda games are built entirely around the fact that it's like, oh, well, now you found this new item in the dungeon. Guess what? You need that to get all the way to the next dungeon. So, I mean, now granted, there's clearly a right way and a wrong way to make, I mean, not like there's distinctly here's the right way and here's the wrong way, but obviously that's a spectrum of potential where it's like, well, are they making the integration of this new item fun? Are they kind of heavy-handing it to you? And I get that you're saying that the Batmobile was heavy-handed in that game, and I think that a lot of people had that same argument. So I can't disagree with that. But at the same time, I'm like, well, yeah, but they did want to say, well, here's why this game's different, because we have the Batmobile. Here's a bunch of fun stuff to go and do that and make that thing useful. As far as the, what was the other element you touched upon there? No, I can't remember.
The overclutter?
The overclutter, okay. I'm fine with the overclutter, even if it doesn't necessarily bring, like, depth to it. It's like, I don't find this token and it's like, oh, you just unlocked chapter 6 of the Action Comics franchise or whatever. But was it a unique challenge to get to that? You know, like we were talking about with Spider-Man 2 earlier, or in the last episode, I guess, with the tokens and getting the different, like, little, you were talking about voice tokens, but I was talking about, like, the little tokens that appear around the buildings that you'd have to, like, backflip through or web sling through, you know. Granted, there were a ton of those, but for me, and Infamous, I think, was pretty bad about that too, but if it presents a unique challenge each time, like, oh, well, the feathers are always platforming challenges, and, you know, these tape recordings or whatever are always kind of miniature races, well, then it does provide a unique experience for each one of the 100 things that you're going to collect. And I mean, really what that comes down to for me is do you like the game or not? Do you want to sit there and grind out getting those collectibles? If you're the person that's like, well, I just want to run around the streets and beat up people as Batman for another 100 hours, well then, no big deal getting all those collectibles because you want something to do anyway. But if you're not really feeling the game, well then that's all going to feel like drudgery to you.
Yeah, and I guess that's a completely valid point, but like I was mentioning earlier with games like Mirror's Edge, I really value that sense of flow. So when that's interrupted, it detracts from the experience for me because I like that, you know, fluid experience, like start to finish, you know, I'm on this journey instead of like sidetracking, you know, chasing down pigeons or whatever.
Right.
So the only thing I would say to that is that's player's choice. You can completely ignore any of that, you know,
Yeah.
especially like when I come across a new challenge in Arkham Knight, I don't have to grab the Batmobile right away. I don't have to even bother with that, trophy to grab. I just can move on and go and play the game.
And that's perfectly valid. I'm not saying that Arkham Knight's like, you know, worst game needs to go in the garbage, but again, like I say, if I feel like it's not necessarily true, but potentially that extra content detracts from effort that could be used to polish the existing content that I do care about. And then it's not necessarily true. Maybe they would have just pushed it out the door the same way it was with or without the extra content. I acknowledge that, but considering that I did really enjoy the experience and the flow of City, I'm inclined to believe that it was just kind of spreading themselves too thin by overcluttering the map. But anyway, I mean, we can move on.
All right, Dragon, what's your third?
Third greatest action adventure game of all time. So one of the things that I personally ran into, kind of an internal debate, as it were, was where I would weigh a game's gameplay against the atmosphere of another game. So it's like, this game has a way better atmosphere, and this game has way better gameplay.
Okay.
This one, I think, pretty much cinched all of it. The controls bothered me a little bit as I was playing it, but all in all, I bring this up because I'm going to flip-flop on the gameplay versus atmosphere thing in a minute. But, number 3, Shadow of the Colossus.
Mm.
I think that definitely, in the long run, there's kind of a almost cult following to this game. I think that critically, it was one that was kind of overlooked early on, but now I don't think there's probably a gamer around that doesn't know what Shadow of the Colossus is.
Right.
And it had that, again, the atmosphere was amazing. The story and how kind of vague it really was. Like there's like no dialogue. I mean, other than the bad guys that are coming to hunt you down or the Colossi themselves. It's like, kid rides up with a girl, she appears to be dead. He lays her on an altar and God voice is like, all right, go kill some monsters. It's like, kind of like, well, what's even the purpose of this game? What's going on here? And even right up to the finale, the end of the game and after game content, it's like, what's the point of any of this? But my like within even the first 10 minutes of the game, the introduction, it's easy to gather. Here's a boy. He's trying to save a girl. But then you meet these colossi. I mean, it opens up all these questions. Who's the boy? Who's the girl? Who are these colossi? Who are these people that are hunting you down? And it never really goes into any detail on any of that. It's like, it's not important. All you need to know is this is who you are and this is what you're trying to do. But then, of course, I love puzzle games, and the colossi, I think each individual colossus represented a puzzle in and of itself. Maybe not the most extreme one, but getting them activated or getting them to wake up or what have you would always be like a fun little challenge. Defeating each one was a fun little challenge. The art in the game was amazing. And definitely challenging gameplay wise. Like I said, sometimes this was unfortunately just a result of the control scheme and it being a little hokey here and there. And then even weird, like the subtleties went beyond just the story. The subtlety of riding the horse, Otto, right? I think his name was Otto. But the subtlety of riding the horse, they never explained any of that. There was no tutorial, there was no hand holding, but there were like 24 horse tricks that you could pull off. Including dismounting while moving and shooting while moving and mounting as the horse runs past you and on all these little weird quirks that you just had to experiment and you just had to discover all of that for yourself. Any of the bonus stuff involving the lizards or the birds or any of that weird crap, like that was all just up to you. Like no intro, no icons on the map, no hand holding as it were. It was like, how thoroughly do you want to feel this world or whatever. And then also included with that the gradual transition of the protagonist from innocent boy to basically monster-like thing, which of course is kind of like a throwback to Ico. That too was interesting. It's one of those things that it's like you don't notice it the first time playing through right away. It takes you a little while to go, oh, there's a transition happening here in the development of my character. Anyway, all in all, I think it's a beautiful game. Challenging, still fun to play, yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Shadow Colossus is good.
Yeah, I really do value the game. I bought it both on PS2 and PS3 on the Ico Shadow of the Colossus re-release. The number one thing I appreciate is that sense of like awesome in the original sense of the word, inspiring awe, like galaxies and stuff. Like the word epic before it just became another word for cool.
Right.
It had that sense of scale that is so rarely replicated. My one problem in replaying it is once the puzzles are solved, you still have to wait on the world and your character, and it can feel like, yeah, come on, get to this point, yada yada. You even on the first playthrough, sometimes you're like, okay, I have to climb the fur and stab the seal, and you're just like, okay, please hurry up the fur. Like, nothing's happening. I'm not threatened at any point right now, but just please climb the fur. Or, on your second playthrough, you're like, okay, the bird's gonna swoop down. I have to like grab onto the wing. This is what's going to happen, and you just have to wait there until the bird decides to swoop at you. And so you're waiting on the game a lot, and that's kind of why I didn't include it in my list. But it was definitely I struggled keeping it off the list. So.
That's fair. I could totally see the waiting on the game thing. For me, again, that makes it feel a little more like dynamic. It makes me feel like I'm in a real world a little bit, because it's like, oh, well, I can't just activate the button sequence that's going to make this thing happen next. It's like, nope, I just got to climb up here and wait until that thing decides to attack me. And that's more realistic. It's like, hunting is not like a black and white, like, oh, if I just fulfill these 7 requirements, the deer will show up and I shoot it. It's like, no, there's a waiting game to be played, but yeah.
So I guess that moves it on to my number 3, and Metroid Prime. I don't know. I was expecting more of a reaction from you, Jay.
I'm excited. I guess I don't know. In my mind, that's like FPS.
I mean, it takes. That's again. So this conversation that we were having last episode about what constitutes an adventure game, because so many of the other games on this list, like, is the Uncharted 4 that you mentioned a third-person shooter, or is it an action adventure?
Good point. No, I'm excited. Metroid Prime is my favorite of the Metroids, and I'm a little jealous it's on your list and not mine. So.
So it doesn't do anything crazy revolutionary. I mean, it did like made the side scroller into a first person shooter type thing, and so that way there's like that change. But just the amount of depth to the world, every little thing can be scanned and has an entry about why this flower is this color, because this is how it evolved, and the other details, like when it's raining, you'll see the rain droplets accumulate on your visor. When the lightning flashes, you'll see the reflection of your own eyes in your visor,
Yeah.
because that's what your heads-up display is your own visor.
I do like it.
Just that level of like craftsmanship, and like the graphics still hold up to this day. It's just a really, and the way the music comes together, it's just such an overall like engrossing package. It doesn't ever have those like jarring moments where it's just like, oh yeah, this is not as good as the rest of the parts. It's just like all very smooth, just very like lovingly created, so good.
I agree. Fantastic game. I would actually the level of what you can scan and the information you get out of it, creating all that lore, that's honestly on like Elder Scrolls level.
Mhm.
Like you scan that plant or that like flying alien, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's called this, and here's 3 paragraphs about like what it does, and you learn more about it. And that's just part of the exploration of everything, and it still sticks true to the Metroidvania, like going back as you get new level ups and or power ups and everything. Great game. I'm glad it's on your list.
Number 2, Jay?
Oh snap! You have anything to say about that, Dragon?
No, I don't like Metroid.
Well,
I've never played Prime, but I never liked any of the old Metroids, so that is one
there's
of
the
those
door.
Never had any reason to jump into a Metroid game.
So my number 2, and this is really hard because
Oh man, we're getting into the juicy shit here.
the,
and this is
the
it.
debate between, like, my internal argument of like what's my number 1 and what's my number 2. I almost feel, and you're gonna hate me for saying this, I almost feel I could switch these 2 games.
Okay.
But one I'm holding on to for nostalgia.
Right.
But so number 2 is, we already touched up on it in the last episode, is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. I absolutely love that game. It's my favorite Assassin's Creed. It probably will forever be, just because myself, I really love pirates, and they actually did really well with their pirate lore and history. And I got the collector's edition, I got the strategy guide, and you go back and you read the strategy guide for that game, and there's an end page where it's, well, an end chapter, and it's talking about all the different pirates that you meet in the game, and like who they were for real. And of course, you have Edward Thatch and Hornigold, and you even have like Captain Kidd and stuff. And it's, they do what Assassin's Creed does best. They took the history of what really did happen, and then was like, well, this assassin did everything.
Right.
So they took the history of pirates, and they're like, oh, well, Edward did all this. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I really love it with the pirate ship battles, just being a pirate, not doing like the typical like hidden assassin. You whip out your dual cutlasses and you're like, whoosh, 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 just like cutting up all the redcoats, just left and right. The story through and through is fantastic, and even the online multiplayer, I can go back and play and like be Blackbeard and just go around and hide amongst the crowd, and I love that. I love that aspect. Everything about the game is just fantastic. So I will always consider it one of my top favorites.
So obviously I like it too. I mean, it was on my list a bit back.
Mhm.
It was on 8, actually. I ranked it as the 8th best action adventure. But so my issue with it is that while it is extremely fun, and I even have the nerve to say that there are aspects of it that I find more thrilling than like Skyrim. Unfortunately for me, the reason I couldn't rank it quite as highly as you is because within the Assassin's Creed mythos even, it's very distant. It's kind of disconnected. You know, I mean, you're not playing as Desmond, of course, anymore, as well as not experiencing that direct bloodline. It's almost like you're just playing as this random guy who's just like, oh yeah, the Assassin's Creed exists. You know, you're not part of it, which was different, interesting in that regard. But the story just felt very tacked on to me. I felt like they were just kind of throwing some stuff out there, like it's hard to explain. It's the same way I feel about like Skyward Sword in the Zelda universe, where they just kind of were like, well, here's some more mythos to make up about some gods and stuff that existed and why we're doing all of this, and I don't really feel like it's integrated into the main story that well. I also wasn't really entertained by the story itself. Like, old Kenway, yeah, I get it. He's a rogue, he's a rapscallion, he doesn't believe in anything or fight for anybody. And then throughout the course of the game, you're like, oh, well, here's your friends, and here's your family, and this is what you're going to fight for, and this is what you believe in. But that, in and of itself, is not a compelling story. It's like, yeah, that's a good element to a story, but they didn't really do enough to make me even care about what actually was going on in the game. I was just like, yeah, let's sail some ships, and let's blow up some other ships, and let's upgrade my ship with the cool black sails. But for me, it was just a gear game. It was like, no, I want to hunt some whales, I want to get the gear, I want to take down the bad man-of-war ships. I had no interest in the story at all. Like, none of that was entertaining. And I agree with the historical aspect of the pirates. I'm like, well, that part was kind of compelling. But for me, for the sheer lack of I don't know, plot or plot twist or anything like that, it was just gameplay for me. Assassin's Creed 4 is just about the gameplay.
See, and the thing is, I think Ubisoft is already like well on board with that because, as you know, so Assassin's Creed was originally going to be a trilogy. It was going to be one with Altair and the Crusades, and that's explaining like why Assassin's Creed is a thing, why it's important. And then there's going to be 2, which is how Desmond gets trained, going through the same training that Ezio did. And there was going to be 3, where originally you were going to play as Desmond in modern day and use your Assassin's Creed training from the second one to solve the problems that came up in the first one and just have it all wrap up nicely. But then it started selling too well, and they decided, well, let's prolong it. Right. And so now, with the recent iterations like Black Flag, like Unity, like the Syndicate, that's the word I was looking for. I was like steampunk one, whatever. Yeah. And they don't have the modern day story to it anymore. They have like this little preface. This takes place in the computer, and you're playing a computer game, and that's really largely the extent of it. They don't really care about any sort of narrative anymore. We need a reason for you to stab people, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so, like, for you to just be like, just let me stab some people and hunt some whales, like, I think Ubisoft is already like right there with you.
Yeah, they're like, yep, that's what this is.
So I don't know if this is good or bad to hear for the audience, but I personally hated Desmond. I hated that whole story. I hated being taken out of the Assassin's Creed Renaissance and like, oh, you're in the real world and
Right.
And so they still screwed up with Black Flag. That's why it's not like the perfect game of all time. Because you are just random Abstergo like employee going into your office and like you're just, oh, you live out his life and like see what's going on. And I wish it was just, no, here, be Captain Kenway, do your thing and stuff like that.
It's true. It would probably just been better if they were just like, you're just a pirate.
Because they even tried to do a whole story as Mr. Random Abstergo dude because they were like, the dumb boss is like, and they're like rival companies, and I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
Stop making me do this 20-minute run around the office
right.
in first person when like, I don't know. I didn't like that part of it. And then I just want to touch up on, you keep talking about like hunting whales and everything and the sharks and whatnot, and that's my favorite part of the whole game.
That's a fantastic part of the game. No,
yeah. And like I had to get that outfit, the the one you get for taking down like all the wells. Like
Yeah.
there was a specific outfit.
Yeah,
I
it's
can't
called
remember
the
what it's called.
Whalers.
Like the Whalers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want that because I want to prove that I killed all of them.
Right, yeah.
They were all. You could even find like Moby Dick, like the
Yeah,
white whale.
white
It was-
whale,
It
yeah.
was so fun. Like throwing spears at them, like having like a hold on and upgrade your stuff. But that's enough of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Dragon, what's your number 2?
All right, second favorite action adventure game of all time, and this is where it gets pretty tough for me. But I like I mentioned before, pretty much all my top 5 are really tied for first.
Yeah.
So it gets hard to toss these around. But and this is the one where I broke the rule. I said I wouldn't do multiple of the same franchise on this list, but this is my one exception. Dishonored 2 is the second best action adventure game of all time for me.
All right.
Now, I will concede that it didn't make me have this like sense of urgency and desperation the way the first one did. The first one really got me, playing as old Corvo, getting stabbed in the back, physically and metaphorically, and then getting arrested and having to work your way up from nothing. That didn't carry over quite as well with the second one. You just kind of had to go with it and just be like for me at least, narratively, I just had to dive into it and be like, okay, well, we're in a similar position again, either as Corvo or as Emily. But being able to play as a female protagonist, first of all, Emily, fell in love with Emily in the first game. You care for her, or at least the game made me care for her in a very, heavy kind of whatever way, paternal way, really, from the first game. And then so being able to play as her was really exciting for me. Again, I'm kind of leaning on this one. I like the atmosphere and the story of the Dishonored games. I like the mythology of it and how again, it's like it's not in your face with all of that. It's all in the items. It's like you read a book, you pick up an item, you talk to a person, and you get a much more fleshed out version of what's actually going on. And I like that you can play through these games, and you can basically just make them action games and just be like, oh, here was the thing, I played it 10 hours, 12 hours, or whatever. Or you can really take your time and learn what's going on in this world, and I got super obsessed with it. I mean, I own the comic books, I own the novel, I have like the little art book and behind the scenes making of books and all that stuff that go along with Dishonored, just so I can flesh out all those details even more. But still, it's that stealth gameplay, that magic. Like I said, being able to finally play as young Emily, or adult Emily, I thought was really cool. And the way they did both the initial gameplay of saying, okay, well, they're both touched by the outsider, but they'll have similar skill sets, but that they deviate from each other. I liked that, the fact that you weren't just playing as Corvo as a girl. It was like, no, you have a different set of things that you do and that you're going to focus on. And
Totally.
and then tied in with that, I liked all the nods to the original game, Easter eggs and stuff like that. But then also with the new game Plus that allows you to basically build your own combination of like a super Corvo Emily conglomerate character, because it allows you to tap into all the abilities basically. Was really rewarding for. I mean, Dishonored already has a really great replayability for me because, of course, the different endings and outcomes that you can have with different characters. But to add to that replayability, they were like, okay, well, this time you're also going to have an entirely different set of moves that you can build and really, truly customize your character to have, whatever proficiencies you want. So yeah, I just love that game, love that Dishonored franchise. So.
Yeah, I mean, like I said with Dishonored 1, there are things I appreciate about it, and you actually touched on something that I'd forgotten about. I really appreciate games that don't just have expositional dialogue to be like, oh, well, Bob killed Fred, and now Bob is guilty or whatever. They kind of let you read emails in Deus Ex, they let you read item descriptions in Demon Souls, whatever it is, games like that just, feel more tangible and more realistic, because nobody just has this expositional dialogue.
All right.
I really appreciate those, so I mean, good job, Dishonored. You're one of those good games. And I guess that leads me to move on to my number 2, which is a number 2 also, Uncharted 2.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really valuable to me. are, I wouldn't say that it's like really valuable to me, like, oh man, this is like my personal favorite, but also it's one of the objectively better action adventure games, because even to this day, but especially around the time this came out, there was a subgenre that I like to call the cinematic shooter, where it was largely interactive movie, and to like break it up and make sure that you were still playing a video game, they would have like shooting galleries. And that's true of most of the Call of Duty campaigns, Crysis 2 and 3, Spec Ops The Line, a ton of shooter games kind of fell into that, where, you know, like stuff happened like almost like dynamically. They're trying to like make it seem less video gamey, more like cinematic. And I actually really enjoy those games for what they are, but I think the number one cinematic shooter is Uncharted 2. And that's just because of how fluid it is. There's never like that awkward moment where it like steers your character, or it like, I mean, there are a couple moments where it like slows you down, but that's because like you got like shot in the gut or whatever. It feels like all smooth is the only word I can use to describe it, and that's like the number one aspect of the cinematic shooter for me, is not having those little hiccups and snags that kind of like pull you out of it. And then just also improving on the first in so many ways, because the first, I mean, everybody made the joke, oh, it's just Dude Raider. It's Lara Croft, but, you know, for people who are afraid of strong, powerful women leads or whatever. And the thing is that it was like a super okay game. But, you know, you climbed up some walls, and then you had a shooting gallery, and then you climbed up some walls, and you had a shooting gallery. And it was like super okay. It was neat. It had like the little Indiana Jones twist of, oh, well, Nazi submarines have ghouls in them. Whoa. But Uncharted 2 kind of smoothed that out a little bit better, and it like integrated, oh, the dynamic thing happened, the train like blew up and is like hanging off a cliff, and while you're hanging on it you also have to shoot the guy because stuff's still happening. It's not just like a cutscene, even though a lot of it like secretly was a cutscene, but you still would never felt comfortable putting on a controller because stuff was sprinkled in and through so dynamically, and there was never like that clean like break where the screen like cuts black and then, you know, the characters are moving from a different perspective. I mean, that there are obviously those moments where it's a movie, it's like a scene where, you know, they find Drake in jail or whatever, but for the large part it keeps you behind Drake's shoulder and stuff is just kind of happening while you're looking at that. Another couple of games that do that like really well, like Half-Life 2 actually has 0 cutscenes, and that type of where the game is just progressing and happening while you're still like in the game engine, and while you can still look around and have your control. That's really cool. So Uncharted 2, best Uncharted, second best action adventure, best cinematic shooter for sure.
You know, and I definitely have to credit you that, like, I'm inclined to say that the Tomb Raider series is better than the Uncharted series. Granted, I'm a sucker for Lara Croft, and that's going to sway my bias a little bit, but I have to concede that really with these reboots, which are my favorite in the Tomb Raider franchise, I don't think we would see the reboots happening the way that they were if it weren't for Uncharted. So while Uncharted may have borrowed from Tomb Raider, I think Tomb Raider in turn borrowed from Uncharted, and that's where we've got the newest version of that. So
That's true.
yeah.
All right.
Number one?
Number one.
Woo!
We made it.
Stop it.
Majora's Mask is my number one, and we've talked a lot about it, so
Oh, man, that game.
I won't spend so much time. My favorite part, though, is how in-depth all the side quests get in Majora's Mask, and you need the certain items, or more importantly, the certain masks to complete the next one, and it's like, you have to kind of figure that out, and when I played it the day before the internet, you know, it's like, you had to figure it out.
Why didn't you just wait a day till the internet came out?
I'm sorry. I just love that, you know, you gotta go collect this mask, and then you gotta go do this thing for this person, and then you gotta collect this mask for them, and then you gotta go do this thing, and without that mask, you can't even talk to that person, the way they won't talk to you, you know? And I think that they did it best, along with everything else we've said about the greatest action-adventure game
The
of all
Couples
time.
Mask, is that what it was called?
Yeah.
It was like
Getting
the
that
last
one?
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then, you know what gets me about that game, and just real quick to touch upon this, because this is one of my favorite things about it, was that originally when I beat Majora's Mask, I didn't get all of the masks. So then you go to the end, you know, and or weird redhead skull kid, whatever, is it's like Mayora the kid or whatever, is up on the moon, right? The 4 versions of him.
Right.
And so you talk to each one of them, and they take your masks, right? Okay, so I didn't have enough masks to get the Oni mask
The
first
first
time
JD?
first time I played it. So when I beat it, I had to beat it in this really fandangled way where I had all 3 of the shape-shifting masks, the Zora, the Deku, the Goron, all equipped at the same time. And then so I would do this like cute thing where like I would turn into the Zora and throw his little boomerangs, but then you could turn into the Goron and actually roll as the Goron as you followed the boomerangs up to Mayora the Beast, right? And anyway, the point is that again, it actually had like a replayable final boss kind of situation where I was like, I got a completely different experience out of doing it, not enough masks.
Yeah.
And then going back, and I was like, well, I want 100% this game because I love it. Let's get all the masks. Let's get the couples mask. And then going back and earning the Oni's mask and then beating it again. And I'm like, oh my god, I'm a god.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Oh
that
my
was
God.
amazing.
That was a completely different story.
Number one?
Number one.
Dragon Black's greatest action adventure game of all time. Now, I gotta admit, there's a certain hesitancy in this. I'm like, oh man, I can't believe this is really the one that I came up with as number one.
Let's hear it.
GTA 5, I'm just gonna say it.
Okay.
Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, if you were to say, what's your favorite Grand Theft Auto, I'm not even inclined to usually bust out GTA 5. I'm not like, oh, this is my favorite one.
It's not mine.
3 was a turning point for me because, of course, 3D action, that was amazing. Open world 3D stuff. Okay, I was like, this is cool. Vice City, always a favorite for me. The atmosphere, the music, actually to this day, I think the story is the best one. Vice City had me the best. San Andreas was like truly open world. We've got deserts, we've got mountains, we've got airplanes, we've got jetpacks. I'm like, this game's crazy.
That's my favorite one.
See, what killed me about San Andreas was the thug life, which granted, CJ's thing was getting out of thug life and his friends just bringing him down, but I hated that. That totally turned me off, and I was like, I can't stand this aspect of the game. But the game itself was great, and I spent many hundreds of hours playing San Andreas and trying to land Mavericks on top of stone pillars. But when it really comes down to it, maybe not for atmosphere, maybe not for story, and it may not even have been a brand new thing for me the way GTA 3 was. But GTA 5 is just all of that. They did such a great job of just creating a fun experience. Like, you play through the main story, and the main story's fine. You got the 3 different protagonists. I liked that aspect, actually, switching in between the 2 and getting the little surprises of what that character was up to, what were they doing in the downtime while you were being somebody else. The overall, the story was okay, you know, kind of typical crime drama stuff, which I don't expect anything too exceptional from a GTA. But for me, all the GTAs have always been great because I could play them for 100 hours not actually accomplishing anything. Which I know, like Worm, for example, you're very goal-oriented. But for me, the glory of every Grand Theft Auto ever was once I unlocked all of the areas, I unlocked the 3rd island or whatever, and then could just run around and just drive cars and act crazy for forever. I could do that for so long. Even in GTA 3, just flying the stupid dodo that wouldn't maintain flight. I could maintain that stuff for hundreds of hours. So within that aspect of it, Grand Theft Auto 5 provides the most amount of stuff to do, provides the most amount of idle entertainment, I guess is the way to put it, where I'm done with the story, and either online or offline, I can just fly around and drive around and just do nothing, really, for hundreds and hundreds of hours. And so, yeah, so GTA 5 is just, I mean, in 2015, I believe it was the single game that I played the most. I put in like 3.5 months of gameplay in 2015 on GTA 5.
It was a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a lot of time. And I mean, like, not in-game months for clarification for the audience. I mean, literally, when you lumped all of the time I spent in 2015, I had played that game for 3.5 months.
Mhm.
And so...
Like 100 days of real time.
Yeah, like 100 days of real time, yeah. And I'm still playing it to this day. When, you know, I granted, I'm a little burnt out on it now. It's been out for a while. I've played a ton of it. And so I don't it's not necessarily my number one go-to anymore, especially after Fallout, but Fallout 4. But still, when my friends get on and they're like, hey, let's go ride dirt bikes, or hey, let's go BMXing, or, you know, yeah, let's do some missions, let's do some races, let's do some heists. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I'm like, jump on. I'm like, let's do this. This is a blast. I still love this game. And so within the definition of action and adventure, I'm like, oh man, GTA.